They're coming over. What in the world? Guys, we're completely stopped. These whales came up to us. Jesus. Wow.
A close encounter with a blue whale is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Now, that opening clip is from one of my whale watching tours in San Diego, and you can hear me explaining to our guests how it was the whales that chose to approach our completely stationary boat, and that's a key distinction for such a close encounter. It was initiated by the animals and not forced upon them by their human admirers. And you're going to see some close encounters with blue whales in this video, and I want you to know that these encounters are fully on the whale's terms. It should go without saying that wildlife should always be approached with caution and respect, but as a wildlife photographer with a modest following, I feel an increased responsibility to mention these disclaimers whenever close interactions between humans and whales are shown on screen. So on to the question posed by the title of this video. Where is the best place in the world to see blue whales? To answer that, we first have to accept the limitations of the premise, because the word best is eternally subjective. What's best for one person might mean something completely different to somebody else. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to define best by combining the following simple criteria. First is the reliability of sightings in a relatively specific geographic location. For example, just stating California, or even Southern California, is far too broad of a range to be of much use to someone hoping to plan a bucket list trip to see a blue whale. We need a specific location that blue whales consistently visit year in and year out. Second is the accessibility of this location to the general public. I'm sure there's some amazing hotspots in the most remote corners of the world's oceans, but for the sake of this exercise, we're gonna focus on locations most accessible for the most amount of people. Third is evaluating the protections and regulations that are in place surrounding whale watching in a given region. I will not in good conscience recommend places where the whales are not consistently protected or respected. Responsible ecotourism is vital to the long-term protection of these animals, but locations without such protections will not be recommended here. This alone is going to skew heavily in the favor of the United States, and that's because marine mammal protections are either non-existent or not really enforced in the other parts of the world where blue whales frequently visit, such as parts of Mexico, the Maldives, Sri Lanka, among others. So taking all of that into account, to me, there's one clear-cut winner, and that's San Diego, California. So why San Diego and not one of the many other strong potential candidates in California? The big one here is that reliability factor. Since 2018, blue whales have been a consistent staple of the San Diego whale watching scene during the early to mid-summer months. Blue whales migrate to Southern California in general to feed, but San Diego has the advantage of being the first stop on that journey. And some years, the krill is so abundant, The whales arrive in San Diego as early as May and can stay well into August, gorging themselves on the tiny crustaceans. In the less productive years, San Diego has another advantage as well over other Southern California destinations, and that's its positioning as both a feeding area and a migratory corridor. Blue whales cross the US-Mexico border along the coast, and if they don't find the krill they're looking for, they then often jet out offshore behind the Channel Islands, essentially bypassing the rest of Southern California. So even if the whales don't stay for a prolonged period of time, we still get about 6 weeks of steady sightings while the whales are migrating past San Diego and working their way offshore. Now I do want to briefly compare San Diego to some other strong California-based destinations. One that often comes up is Monterey Bay. Monterey Bay is not only one of the best locations in California for whale watching, it's one of the best places in the world for whale watching during the spring through fall. However, when it comes to blue whales, Monterey Bay has not had consistent sightings in any predictable fashion for nearly a decade. That's not to say there hasn't been momentary pulses of blue whales, but nothing that approaches consistency or predictability. It's a similar situation in the Santa Barbara Channel area. Some years, like in 2020 and parts of 2024, Santa Barbara can have some of the densest aggregations of blue whales on Earth. But it's a boom or bust proposition, as very few blue whales were seen in Santa Barbara at all in 2021, 2022, or 2023, and some of those years had single-digit days of sightings. So while there are years San Diego won't see the most whales of all of California whale watching destinations, it is the one place in the last decade where you could actually plan to reliably see blue whales year in and year out, particularly in June and early July. Now, based on my experience tracking blue whales for almost 9 years now, when these whales are in Southern California, the whales either focus their feeding efforts along the near coastal shelves, or they spend their time exploring the abundant offshore canyons and seamounts. In the past, San Diego whale watching boats would ignore those offshore areas because they were simply too far away to reach. I wanted to change that, so my company, Gone Whale Watching, designed blue whale focused trips that use faster boats capable of covering over 200 miles in a single day. So even in the down years like 2020 or 2021, we still saw blue whales on nearly every single long-range trip we ran, and over 50% of the 2.5-hour trips in June and July. Now, each of the last 3 years have been really strong for blue whale sightings with Gone Whale Watching in San Diego. Success rates hovered over 90% on the traditional 2.5-hour trips during June and July, so I'm really hopeful for another strong year in 2025. But I have to finish this video by acknowledging that blue whales are wild animals that have shown a proclivity for being very unpredictable. The second you think you have a grip on what they're going to do next, they remind you of just how much humility and patience is required to have the privilege of catching a glimpse of them in the wild. Ocean currents and conditions are constantly changing, and while I genuinely believe San Diego is the most reliable destination to see blue whales on Earth, the true best location is wherever the blue whales choose to be.